The battle to bring desegregation to Little Rock became a critical spark to the modern civil rights movement after a group of 9 black students successfully integrated Little Rock Central High in September 1957. The resistance to desegregation in Little Rock highlighted the problem of enforcing federal desegregation laws in the years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Arkansas citizens and officials used avoidance strategies that were typical of the massive resistance to desegregation around the country. These strategies included deliberate delay by school officials, harassment of the NAACP and other civil rights advocates, and encroachment from a state government determined to delay compliance with federal law. Once federal troops were ordered to Central High, Little Rock became the central symbolic event in racial politics of the 1950s. On May 17, 1954, the Brown decision ruled segregated public schools unconstitutional, stating, "In the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place." A year later, after issues of implementing the Brown decision began to increase, the court passed Brown 2. This opinion ordered schools to act with all deliberate speed in implementing their desegregation procedures. Immediately following the Brown 2 decision, Little Rock School Board Superintendent Virgil Blossom began creating a plan to integrate the city's schools. The initiative, known as the Blossom Plan, was crafted in a way that was acceptable to the courts and local whites, but still kept the majority of the power in the hands of the board. The Little Rock School Board unanimously approved a plan to integrate in 3 stages, beginning with the city's high schools. In 1955, however, the local NAACP chapter, led by local resident and Arkansas NAACP president Daisy Bates, filed suit against the school board, alleging that the integration plan was being implemented too slowly. Superintendent Blossom, in an attempt to please segregationists and win court approval of his plan, testified that integration should be left up to the local school board and not dictated by the national NAACP. He argued that school standards would be lowered and violence would break out if integration was too widespread and implemented too quickly. Blossom also asserted that centuries of culture and opportunity gave an advantage to white students, and interrogating black students would academically hold white students back. With this assertion, Blossom was contending that the case was as much about class as it was race. In August 1956, District Court Judge John E. Miller accepted Blossom's reasoning and upheld the integration plan as written. Miller ruled that the Little Rock School Board was acting in good faith and with the intent to admit students on a non-racial basis. Local whites saw the decision as a victory but failed to recognize that Miller's decision had now placed the school board on a federal court order to proceed with their integration plan immediately, or face contempt of court convictions. The NAACP felt defeated and declined to appeal the decision to the Supreme Court out of fear the minimum compliance Blossom Plan would become the standard for integration procedures around the country. The school board, recognizing their upper hand, continued to drag their feet and reduce the integration plan. In the summer of 1957, Daisy Bates, at the expense of vicious harassment by local segregationists, spent her days encouraging black students to apply at Central High. Bates knew this process would not be easy and dedicated her time to preparing students for their interviews with Superintendent Blossom. In an attempt to purposely reduce the number of black students allowed and willing to attend Central High, Blossom made these interviews as difficult and intimidating as possible. The tactic was successful. More than 70 students submitted applications to attend Central High, but only 17 of these students were passed through the board's discriminatory screening process. Of the 17, only 9 chose to enroll in classes. Those 9 became known as the Little Rock 9. Initially, members of the Little Rock community supported the Blossom Plan for gradual integration. This changed drastically as the high-profile legal battles motivated white supremacist groups to seek further legal action, threaten violence, and call on the support of Arkansas Governor Orville Favis to defy the federal courts and refuse integration at Central High. With threats of violence that Blossom could not contain and the school year quickly approaching, the board tried and failed to find a way out of their legal obligation to implement the integration plan. Public officials at all levels created a political culture of buck passing that heightened the threat of violence and slowed racial change by encouraging the beliefs that federal court decisions lacked legitimacy and that defiance could be effective. In an attempt to reduce the pressure mounting against him, Blossom called on the assistance of Governor Favis to make a public statement demanding law and order throughout the integration process. Initially to spare himself the political damage, Favis denied this request and refused to involve himself in what he claimed should be a local decision. In private, Favis recognized he could not remain silent on the issue and was secretly weighing options that would benefit him politically. Although Favis was not a dedicated segregationist, politically he knew he had run and won his election by catering to white supremacist values. His promise to strive with every personal resource and with every resource vested by law and tradition in the office of governor of Arkansas to maintain segregation in a calm, orderly, thoughtful, and completely legal manner had come back to haunt him. As the school year drew closer, threats of violence and resistance among segregation groups increased and Favis was forced to act or suffer politically. Going against the plea from Blossom to endorse his plan, Favis filed a lawsuit with the state court to delay integration at Central High. This would provide time to quell the violent rhetoric and reduce the political pressure he was facing. In an effort to win his case, Favis publicly warned that Little Rock's desegregation plan would lead to violence and unrest in the city. Favis' speech, along with hype-up rhetoric from surrounding states' political leaders advocating opposition to integration, sparked active resistance and mass protests in Little Rock. Daisy Bates suffered directly from this violence, most notably when a rock was thrown through her living room window with a note, "Stone this time, dynamite next." As a result of these events that Favis helped ignite, a state court injunction against the implementation of the plan was granted. On September 1st, 1957, Favis declared, in order to secure the peace and order of Little Rock, black children would not be allowed to enter Central High. In a televised address, he ordered the state's National Guard to be stationed around the school to prevent the entrance of the 9 black students. In response to the mob growing around the school and the new immediate threat, the school board again petitioned a federal judge for a delay. After 2 days of missed classes for the Little Rock 9, the federal district court denied this request and ruled against the state. Governor Favis was ordered to stop interfering in the integration process. Bates, wasting no time, planned for the Little Rock 9 to meet at a location near the school the next morning and be transported with police escort into Central High. On September 3rd, Elizabeth Eckford took the bus to school and began her short walk to what she thought would be her first day at Central High. Eckford decided late in the summer to enroll in Central High, missing out on the planning and information sessions offered by Daisy Bates. Without a telephone, Eckford was unaware the others in the group planned to meet and arrive at the school together and took the bus alone. Upon her arrival at Central High, a large angry white mob had congregated in front of the school. Eckford was confused and scared as the mob drew closer and began screaming and spitting at her. She moved to find an entrance to the school as the mob followed behind her, but the guardsmen continued to block her entrance. In fear of her life, Eckford knew it was time to retreat. The harassment continued against the remaining 8 as they arrived at the school. They quickly discovered the National Guard were not there to protect them and retreated to their homes. In Washington, D.C., without the knowledge of those in Little Rock, United States Attorney General Herbert Brownell began an investigation into Governor Favis' use of the National Guard at Central High. After the Brown decision, Brownell was aware that a clash of historic importance was inevitable between the president, who was required by the Constitution to enforce the law of the land, and political leaders in the South who had announced their plan to resist the enforcement of Brown's decisions. Early in his investigation, Brownell believed Favis was not using the Guard to preserve peace in Little Rock, but rather to purposely defy federal judge Robert Davies' order urging Favis not to interfere with integration at Central High. This began the federal involvement in Little Rock and would turn the crisis into an event discussed around the world. President Dwight D. Eisenhower faced an incredible dilemma as his administration stalled in their decision to act. Awaiting the results of the FBI investigation and a sure understanding of Favis' intentions, Eisenhower downplayed the need for federal involvement in Little Rock. Beyond the struggle for the administration to define the relationship between state and local powers, Cold War conflicts were bringing worldwide attention to the racial events. How was it possible for this level of injustice to occur in what was supposed to be the land of the free? On September 13, Favis agreed to meet with President Eisenhower. Favis highlighted the progress Arkansas had made in integration, argued his stance that Little Rock had become a battleground of publicity for the integration movement, and placed blame on Blossom for involving the state in what he believed should have been a local decision. Further, Favis argued the Brown decision was presented to the public as the law of the land when it should have been seen as the law of the case. After presenting his case to the president, Favis asked for a delay, a cooling off period, that would restore peace and provide a later opportunity to admit black students with less difficulty and worldwide attention. The President's administration, however, concluded a delay could not be legally accomplished and ordered Favors to comply with federal law. Favors immediately withdrew the troops from Central High on Friday, September 20th. This action opened the door to mob rule in Little Rock and essentially passed the buck for integration enforcement to Washington. On Monday, September 23rd, the Little Rock Nine were escorted by local police to attend their first day at Central High. The students entered the school unnoticed, but word of the black students' attendance began to spread quickly. A large mob developed outside, and the 9 students were removed shortly after lunch for their safety. The following day, Little Rock Mayor Woodrow Mann requested federal help in preventing the angry mob of segregationists from keeping the Little Rock Nine out of Central High. Mann wrote to President Eisenhower on September 24th, "People are converging on scene from all directions. Mob is armed and engaging in fistcuffs and other acts of violence. Situation out of control and police cannot disperse the mob. I'm pleading with you as President of the United States in the interest of humanity, law and order, and because of democracy worldwide to provide the necessary federal troops within several hours. Action by you will restore peace and order in compliance with your proclamation." Eisenhower, forced into action by Faber's defiance, ordered 1,100 troops from the U.S. Army's 101 Airborne Division to Little Rock to disperse the mob and help enforce the desegregation plan. It was the first time in 81 years that a president had dispatched troops to the South to protect the constitutional rights of black Americans. President Eisenhower, in an attempt to remain politically neutral on integration, explained his actions in Little Rock not as an attempt to take over the process of integration, but as a means to enforce a federal court order and prevent mob rule. In this televised statement, Eisenhower made clear, enemies of the United States were gloating over this incident and called on the citizens of Little Rock to end their defiance and obstruction of the law. Under protection of federal troops, the Little Rock Nine finally began classes at Central High on September 25, 1957. The significance of the Little Rock crisis remains to this day as the nation continually looks back on the heroic efforts of Daisy Bates and the Little Rock Nine to secure educational equality for themselves and African Americans around the nation. The events of mass resistance to integration brought to light the difficulty of enforcing federal law in the absence of the majority's desire to comply. This created immense pressure for the United States to tackle the problem of racial inequality at its highest level. Under the pressures of the Cold War and the state government issuing a direct challenge to his executive authority, President Eisenhower was offered no choice but to publicly support the Brown decision and enforce federal law. The segregationists' attempt to resist change through dragging their feet, defying court orders, and harassing civil rights activists proved futile. Images of the crisis flashed around the world as Little Rock became a triumph for the NAACP and a critical spark to integration around the country through moving both the Supreme Court and the President into action.